Uniranda pisone nekamia kashimitina Tsazuenuna nduari bariba Renifanano manitina Tsare nihira nitanikyo Tiko lokia katimba takaluku Tsare nihira nitanikyo Tiko lokia katimba takaluku
About some of them. Please welcome Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you, Ashok, and thank you, Paul, wherever you're sitting, for putting us so wonderfully into the right mood for our deliberations. We had human music coming in. I'm going to bring another kind of music into this room because, as you all know, I've spent all these years studying chimpanzees, and they have a voice too. And one of my roles as I travel around the world is to bring the voice of animals out into people's lives to help people who don't understand. And I'm sure many of you in this room do understand, but there are still people out there who don't understand that animals are more than just things. Animals are not just objects. Animals too have their voice. And one of my roles has been to try and give a voice to the voiceless. But this particular call from the chimpanzees is the sound that they make when they're very content. It's the sound usually made in the evening rather than the morning, but it seemed to follow on from Paul's music rather beautifully. So I bring you the singing pantoot of the chimpanzee, the closest they get to music. And that's the sound that you would hear if you came with me to Goldby. Imagine them lying in their nests and they're peaceful with their tummies full of food, and you hear one group on one side of the valley and they'll be answered by others. It's like the old town criers, 8 o'clock on a moonlit night and all's well with the world. That sort of feeling you get from the chimpanzees. What I thought I'd do this morning, and there are many things that could be done, but we're talking about global citizenship and all kinds of lofty concepts. And I thought I'd just try to show you what happened in my life. It so naturally put me on a different stage. It wasn't any major deliberation I had in my own mind to say, well, when I grow up, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to travel the world and I'm going to become a messenger of peace and I'm going to be a global citizen. It wasn't like that at all. It wasn't at all. I was born a little girl in London to a family without very much money. We couldn't afford a bicycle, let alone a motor car. And then along came World War II. We had even less money and my father went off fighting. And I went to live with my mother and sister, with her mother and 2 sisters, so it was a house full of women. And apparently from the time I was a tiny little girl, I loved animals, and I was always watching them. And the reason I'm going back to this time in my life is because of the enormously important role played in everything I've done by my mother. She was truly a remarkable person. And we've only just left Mother's Day. And so I want to continue this theme of honoring motherhood and being a really as good a mother as one can to one's children. But she always supported everything that I did. So when she found I'd taken a whole handful of earthworms to bed to watch how they moved without legs perhaps, instead of getting mad at me, she said, Jane, they'll die without earth. So I picked them up and took them back into the garden. And this continued my whole childhood. She supported all this love of animals, didn't mind the animals coming in the house, found the books I wanted to read, Dr. Dolittle, and then I found Tarzan, the books, not the movies. Fell in love with Tarzan, was terribly jealous of that wimpy Jane. Decided I would have been a much better mate for Tarzan myself. That was when the dream began. And I decided when I grew up I would go to Africa, live with animals and write books about them. I mean, I knew I wouldn't find Tarzan, but the next best thing was the animals. And of course everybody laughed at me. How would I do that when we didn't have any money? Africa was still the dark continent and filled with cannibals and all these rumors that we heard. But everybody laughed except my mother. And she would say, Jane, if you really want something and you really work hard and you take advantage of opportunity and you never give up, you will find a way. And so eventually that led me not through the normal course of going to university, we couldn't afford it, but I did a secretarial course, got invited to Kenya by a school friend, saved up my money by being a waitress, got out there, met the late Louis Leakey. He was the one who gave me this incredible opportunity to go and learn about our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees. And looking back now over nearly 45 years, we're coming up to our 45th anniversary this July. Looking back, we find that the chimpanzees have made such an impact on scientific thinking. And when I went out there to study them, I had no plan of being a scientist. I wanted to be a naturalist. I wanted to live out in nature. And yet, when we look back, we find that information about the Gombe chimpanzees, where we've worked for so long in Tanzania, and the information from chimpanzee groups in other parts of Africa, and some of the information from captive individuals, has really helped not only for us to understand the complexities of amazing beings who yet aren't human, but it's also helped us to better understand our own position in relation to the rest of the natural world. We are connected. There isn't a divide. It isn't as science and Western religion used to maintain that we are aloof on a pinnacle, separated from the rest of the animal kingdom by this unbridgeable chasm. It's not like that at all. And we find that one by one, some of the criteria that were used to emphasize our uniqueness are shared also by chimpanzees. So that, first of all, the biological similarities, we hadn't a clue back in 1960 that we differed from chimpanzee in the composition of DNA by only 1%. 1%. We didn't know back in 1960 you could have a blood transfusion from a chimp if you matched the blood group. We didn't know these things. We didn't know that chimpanzees were susceptible to all known human contagious diseases, or at least can be infected with the viruses. It's not really surprising, given that the chimpanzee brain is more like ours than that of any other living creature, that they're capable of intellectual feats that we once thought unique to us. And we don't have time to go into all that now. You just have to take my word for it, and you can read about it in books, and you can even check our janegoodall.org website. It's there. But take my word for it. They are so like us in so many ways. It helps us to understand also our uniqueness. And if I were to pick one thing that separates us from all the other amazing animals, is that it's we and only we who have this sophisticated spoken language, so that I can tell you with words about things you've never seen or even thought about, and bring pictures to you to help you to understand. And we can teach our children about things that aren't here. We can make plans for the distant future. We can discuss together, as we shall today, the interconnectedness of all life, and the importance of honoring each little piece of the ecosystem, each culture of the human family, in order to build together this large picture of a global community that is human and other than human, where the animals have their place and matter, where the plants and trees have their place and matter very much, and where each single individual human being has his or her place and matters in the scheme of things. That means each one of you. It means me. It means Jonathan sitting up here. We all have our role. Each single one of us is really and truly important. So we owe this to the chimpanzees, that they've opened our eyes. And if we develop a new respect for this, the animal closest to us in the animal kingdom, what about all the other amazing animals with whom we share this planet, who also have minds and personalities, and above all feelings, who can feel happy and sad and fearful? Think how we abuse so many of them without meaning to very often. And it raises ethical issues which some people haven't even been aware of. And it's all part of being part of this global community to recognize these interconnections of feelings, of emotions, and then perhaps also of spirit. There are still some people who say, well, all right, we know that chimpanzees can do this, that, and the other, but only humans have souls. Is that true, I wonder? We don't exactly know what a soul is. We have this, I have this innate knowledge, understanding of a great spiritual power, a power that we can call God or Tao or Allah, something like that. And I get this feeling that there's a spirit around there from which I can derive strength, and that a spark of that spirit within me, which is other than the soul. If I have this spark of this other than human spirit, why not a chimpanzee? Why not a dog? Why not a cow? Aren't they all living beings with feelings? I think they are. And so this is the picture that the chimpanzees have helped me to paint, to understand the interconnectedness of all living beings on this planet and how each and every one of us has a part to play. So it's very sad to find that chimpanzees right across their range in Africa are vanishing. From about 2 million 100 years ago, they're down to about 200,000 at the most. They're disappearing because their habitat is being destroyed by ever-growing human populations. They're disappearing because they're caught in traps set for animals for food. They're disappearing because logging companies have gone into Africa from Europe and from Asia, and they're opening up the last of the great rainforest with roads, and along the roads come hunters from the towns, and they shoot every living creature, dry it, smoke it in the sun for meat. This isn't subsistence hunting. This isn't to feed hungry people. It's to cater to the preference for bushmeat, wild animals, of the urban elite who will pay more for a little piece of bushmeat, whether it's chimpanzee, gorilla, antelope, bird or bat, than they will for chicken or goat. And so the chimpanzees are vanishing. We're doing what we can. We don't have time to talk about that. We're trying to save the Gombe chimpanzees, who are now completely surrounded by farmland and isolated from other small remnant groups. We're doing what we can with the Congo Basin Forest Partnerships, partnering with other NGOs on the ground, with the big donor agencies, with government officials, and with the local people. It was about 15 years ago when I flew over the Gombe area and realized the extent of the deforestation, that all the trees had basically gone except those in really steep ravines as the human population grew, and then suddenly this great influx of refugees, first from Burundi and then over the lake from Congo. And many of these settled around the villages. And the Congolese brought with them their culture of eating chimpanzees and monkeys, so that for the first time in the mid to late early 80s, the chimpanzees were subjected to poaching. It hadn't happened before. The Tanzanians don't eat chimpanzees. And it was as I flew over this area and looked down at the land where the trees had gone, I could imagine the crippling poverty and struggles of the people living there. They're so poor they can't afford to buy food elsewhere. And there were far too many people living on this very stony land, very steep mountainsides, and very clearly terrible soil erosion problems. They couldn't afford to buy food elsewhere. They couldn't move very far because of this overpopulation. And that led to a program called Take Care. How could we save the chimpanzees unless at the same time we improved the lives of the people living around the national park? We're now in 22 villages, shortly to be in 33. Not a program where a group of white people march into an African village and say, we're very sorry for you, we know you're suffering, this is what we propose to do for you. Not a bit. A team of Tanzanians, skilled in all the different technologies that we wanted to help introduce into the villages, would go and talk to the headmen, talk to the women, and gradually these villages adopted the every element of the program as their own, and that's why it's so successful. And now they're our partners. Now they want to help us conserve the natural world because they know how important it is. Now they're allowing the tree stumps to grow back into trees because they're growing firewood for themselves. And so leafy corridors will enable our chimps to interact with others. And it's working together, us and the local people, so that now we are ready to replicate take care in other parts of Africa. Africa is a tragic continent. There is huge crippling poverty right across the continent. Poverty leading to hunger and disease and overpopulation in a vicious cycle. The droughts are getting worse. Desertification is creeping across the country. The last of the great trees are in danger of being felled. And everywhere we find that there is ethnic conflict and violence and war. And if we look around the rest of the developing world, we find very much the same picture. If we look in our developed world, what do we find? That we're polluting and poisoning the air, the water, and the land, flinging synthetic chemicals heedlessly into our fields, onto our golf courses, onto our gardens. People are getting sick in ways they never were sick before. We have chemicals in our body that we never had before. We're recklessly burning fossil fuel. We're increasing the greenhouse gases. We are seeing the results of accelerated global warming. We're in the midst of global climate change that's very scary. And as I began traveling around the world further and further, trying to raise awareness about the plight of the chimpanzees, the African forests, and then gradually the other amazing creatures with whom we share this planet, we need to talk about them too. I kept meeting young people who seemed to have lost hope, who were either depressed, or they were apathetic, or they were bitter, angry, and sometimes violent, because they felt that we have compromised their future, and we have. I look at my grandchildren and think how we've destroyed the world since I was their age, and I feel deep shame. And that led to this Roots and Shoots program. It's a symbolic name. Roots make a firm foundation. Shoots seem tiny. To reach the sun together, they can break through brick walls. And if we see the brick walls as all these man-made problems, everything from destruction and damage of the environment to the crime and the cruelty and the war, the drugs, the violence, the today terrorism, all of these terrible problems that we've inflicted on the planet, then Roots and Shoots is a message of hope that hundreds and thousands around the world can break through and can change the world. And so this program, which began with 18 high school students in Tanzania in 91, and didn't even think of leaving Tanzania till the end of 93, we now have more than 7,000 groups in more than 80 countries, and we have programs for preschool right through university and beyond. We've moved out, Roots and Shoots moved out. I don't think anyone planned it. It just happened to grow into prisons, and it happened to grow into senior citizen complexes, and it happened to grow into community centers and offices. All of these have started Roots and Shoots groups. So what is it? What do Roots and Shoots do? Why is it spread this way? It's all about empowerment. It's about helping people understand the problems and then empowering them to do something about it. Empowering an individual to realize that although we each feel so tiny as a part of a population of 6 billion, what can I do? I know the kind of things I should do each day to make the world a better place, but it's not going to really matter, is it, in the face of 6 billion? But if every one of the 6 billion who actually understood, maybe half, did and lived the way they know they should, and didn't do the things they knew would inflict harm on the environment or on society, can you imagine how quickly the world would change? And with our new methods of communication electronically, there is an opportunity greater than ever before to spread this information around the world, to increase the number of people who theoretically can make a difference every day with their own individual lives. And those of us who are wealthy enough to make ethical choices in what we buy and what we don't buy, we have the power to change business overnight, because if we decide, I'm not going to buy a product from this company, it uses child slave labor. I'm not going to buy this cosmetic, it's tested on animals. I'm not going to buy that product because it's destroying the rainforest and causing animal extinction. Those products won't get made. They'll be made in a different way, in a more ethical way. So we have that power. We don't like our government? Have we voted? Have all our friends voted? If we don't vote, we won't get the people we need. And until there's a large enough number of people out there to care about the future, to think in terms of the old indigenous wisdom, which makes every decision based on how will this affect our people 7 generations ahead, instead of what happens today. Let's make a decision today, says the big corporation, based on the next 3-month report for our stockholders. 3 months. Let's even try 1 generation ahead. We've forgotten that too today. But at any rate, once we get this groundswell of people who vote in the right politicians, who will make the right decisions, the tough decisions, because they know that more than 50% of the people are behind them and they'll be re-elected. Then they'll dare to make those tough decisions, otherwise they won't, because a politician wants to be re-elected. So we have this huge power as individuals, and we are connected around the world. And I'm going to end with, well, I should say that each Roots and Shoots groups does 3 projects to make the world a better place. 1 for animals, including domestic animals, 1 for people, and 1 for the environment that we all share. And so I'm going to end with one last story. It's about a chimpanzee who was born in Africa. His mother was shot when he was about 1.5. That's how you catch baby chimps. And he was shipped off to a North American zoo where he lived for about 15 years alone in a small cement cage with iron bars. And then a new zoo director came along and raised the money. He was going to build the biggest enclosure for chimpanzees in North America. And he bought 19 other chimps. And carefully these individuals were introduced to each other, always a tricky business. And finally they were allowed out into the enclosure. The oldest of them was Jojo, who had been there already for 15 years, but by himself. Everything was fine for a while, and then one of the new young males, as new young males always do, challenged the senior male with his bristling display. And Jojo was terrified. He didn't know anything about chimp behavior. How could he? And the enclosure was surrounded by a moat filled with water, because chimpanzees don't swim, but Jojo didn't know anything about water. He ran into the moat, and so afraid was he scrambled over the barrier built to prevent the chimps from drowning, 3 times disappeared under the water, and then he was gone. There was a little group of people on the far bank, and there was a zookeeper who knew Jojo weighed 130 pounds, that male chimps can be dangerous. He ran off to get a pole to fish Jojo out. But one man there, who visits the zoo 1 day a year with his wife and his 3 little girls, jumped in spite of everyone telling him he'd be killed. And he swam feeling under the water until he got touched Jojo's body, got this 130-pound dead weight over his shoulder, felt small movements, knew Jojo was alive, got him over that barrier, pushed him up onto the bank, turned to rejoin his rather hysterical family. There was a woman there with a video camera. She doesn't even remember filming, but we can see and hear what happened next. First, the people on the bank start screaming for Jojo, for Rick to hurry back, because from their elevated position, they can see 3 of the big male chimps coming down to see what the commotion is about, hair bristling, teeth gleaming. And at the same time, Jojo is sliding back towards the water because the bank is too steep. And the camera's all over the place, but amazingly, it steadies on Rick. And you see him standing there, he's got one hand on the railing. You see him look up at his wife and little girls. You see him look towards where these 3 male chimps are coming, and you see him look down to where Jojo is disappearing under the water. And for a moment, Rick stood there motionless. And then he went back. And again, he pushed Jojo up out of the water. And this time he stayed there in spite of everyone yelling at him, in spite of these 3 males approaching. And Jojo's making feeble efforts to grab onto something. And just in time, he gets hold of a thick tuft of grass and is able to pull himself up to safety. And just in time, Rick gets back over that barrier. And that evening, that little piece of video was flashed around North America. And the then director of the Jane Goodall Institute saw it and called up Rick. He said, "Mr. Swope, that was a very brave thing you did. You must have known it was dangerous. Everyone was telling you. What made you do it?" And Rick said, "Well, you see, I happened to look into his eyes. And it was like looking into the eyes of a man. And the message was, would anybody help me?" And you see, that's the message I've seen in the eyes of little chimps tied up in the marketplaces in Africa whose mothers have been shot for food. I've seen it in the eyes of chimpanzees looking out from the small prison cells, 5 foot by 5 foot, of the medical research laboratories. In the eyes of the chimpanzee cruelly trained for the circus under the frills. I've seen it too in the eyes of elephants, the eyes of abandoned dogs. I've seen it in the eyes of little children caught up in inner city violence with no one to turn to. I've seen it in the eyes of children in Africa who've seen their parents killed in the ethnic violence. And it's a look which, if we see with our eyes and feel in our hearts, if we feel it in our hearts, we have to jump in and try to help. And the greatest hope that I have for the future, yes, the human brain, we're capable of getting ourselves out of problems if we really try. Yes, the resilience of nature. Nature is very forgiving, and if we give her a chance, places we've destroyed will bloom again. Yes, the indomitable human spirit, people tackling impossible tasks and not giving up, and the tremendous enthusiasm of young people once they know what the problems are and we empower them to act. But it's this feeling as I travel the world that more and more and more people are responding to this terrible need. The need of the animals, the need of people, the downtrodden. More and more people are jumping in to help. There are more and more non-government organizations stepping in to help where government doesn't. And while we were having that minute of silence when we began this morning, I started to see these eyes looking out from around the world. And then while Paul was playing, I was seeing the hands reaching out to help. And that's our hope for the future, that more and more people are seeing with their eyes and feeling with their hearts and reaching out to help. And that's what each one of you can do to play your role. That's what each one of us can do. We hold the hope for the future in our hands. We must not go on leaving it to the decision makers until we're in a position to make the right decision makers because we're voting right. Thanks. Now I'm going to introduce a very special person. You know who he is, it's Jonathan. Jonathan is first and foremost a very dear friend. He came into my life sort of like a shining star about 7 years ago. And Jonathan has so much enthusiasm, so much passion. He's an international lawyer, you know, so big sharp brain in there. You can't be an international lawyer and be dumb. So he's very bright. But what about the heart? And it's when you get really bright people, really bright scientists, who've lost their connection with their heart, that you get a very dangerous human being. But Jonathan's heart is probably bigger than his brain. There may be equal, I don't know. Anyway, this creates the kind of person that I'm very proud to have as a friend. And I think of all the different roles that Jonathan plays, and there are many. I mean, you know, he got me into the United Nations. I wouldn't have been a messenger of peace but for Jonathan. And he gets me involved in all kinds of extraordinary things. He had me talking at a conference on international bioterrorism. I mean, for heaven's sake. He gets my heart beating and the adrenaline flowing, all right. But the role he's playing now, which I think for all of us is extremely crucial, is the abolition of nuclear weapons. Jonathan will tell you about it, but I've seen the devastation that still exists in places like Nagasaki and Hiroshima after the bombs were dropped that ended World War II. The scars are covered over, but there are people still suffering. There are children still being born contaminated as a result of the radiation of their parents back then. And there are still all these weapons out there. They can annihilate us. They are terribly destructive of the environment. If we care about 7 generations ahead, it behooves all of us to do what we can to help Jonathan in his sometimes very lonely task. So let me introduce Jonathan, as I say, most especially. He's a very dear friend.
Thank you, Jane. Dr. Gangadine, thank you for your persistent work in convening people and bringing us to dialogue. This event wouldn't have taken place, and this whole process that Ashok was talking about, without his commitment to what he calls deep dialogue, which I wanted to just say that I think there's 4 modalities of human communication. One of them is communion. That's where we affirm our underlying unity. It's silent, it's ineffable, it's the place where we are one with the great mystery that we come from and to which we return. It's the absolute unity of the mystery of life that we share with the Creator, that we are endowed with communion with the mystery and with each other. That's communion. The second is dialogue. That's in duality, where we meet each other and we are able to see the other person, the other culture, the other point of view, and enter into understanding where the other person is coming from. It begins with respect, which when you break that down, it comes from spectere, to look at, but to re-look at, to look at the other person from their point of view. It was interesting, I just had a dialogue before the International Law Section of the American Bar Association with Robert McNamara. And afterwards, I actually got to say to him that I loved him. But that was after I told him that I had harbored hatred in my heart for him for several decades. And I told him how ashamed I was that I had harbored that hatred in my heart, because I hadn't understood that, yes, I condemned what he had done, but that I had no right to condemn him. Because I had learned that he had learned from the mistakes. And one of the principles that he expressed in this dialogue, there were 2 principles he expressed. One principle was that the United States and any other major power should never engage in the use of force outside of international law and without true multilateral cooperation. He said, had that principle of civilization and law been applied in Vietnam, we would not have been dragged into the quagmire. He said, if we simply listened to our friends. We had no friends, really, in Vietnam. He said, all we had to do was listen to our friends. The second principle that he set forth was, understand the position of your adversary. Not just because it's the human position, but because it's the practical position. And then he had once described for me how they had gridded Vietnam, and some social scientists had tried to quantify how much punishment you needed to inflict